On today's Locked On Bucks, round 2 of the NBA draft is in the books. The Bucks did use the number 33 overall pick, and it seems like it's a name that is more pleasing to Bucks fans than what they did in the first round. So we'll get into the 2 picks made by the Bucks, what we can take away from that, if anything, going into free agency, which is already here this weekend, and some additional thoughts on some other moves we saw made by the other 29 teams in this year's draft. That conversation comes your way next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. The draft is now officially in the books, as the Bucks did hold on to that number 33 pick in the second round. That was the interesting part to me, Camille, is what would the Bucks do with that pick? Because we had heard from multiple reports throughout the day and late last night that there was going to be a lot of interest for those first 3 to 4 picks in the second round of the draft. When you looked at some of the names that were still out there, there was Kyle Filipowski, Tyler Smith, who the Bucks ultimately got. We'll get to him in a second. Even Johnny Furphy, Tyler Kolek. These were all names. Bobby Klintman, that carried some value of guys that could step in. Maybe not so much Klintman, but some of those other names could step in and be a contributor in terms of a role player relatively early. So would that entice other teams to jump in there and offer, whether it's future seconds or what, to get into the early portion of the second round? And you wondered for the Bucks too, a team that, frankly, could use for some additional second round picks, given everything they're up against for the next couple of years. But I suppose the other part of the conversation was, when you go back to yesterday's selection, it's not anything that you're anticipating you're going to see AJ Johnson step in and be an immediate contributor in terms of 15 to 20 minutes per game. And hey, even maybe 5 minutes per game here. It's going to be more of, I hesitate to say project, but it's going to be more of a long-term thing. So you wonder, does that kind of change what the Bucks are looking to do here? And are they going to view that second round pick, given what we said was the perceived value out there, as somebody that could fill that role and contribute somewhat soon, if not immediately? It appears that was the course they went, because we mentioned again, the Bucks using that pick, number 33 overall here, to select Tyler Smith, who played for the G League Ignite last season. Depending on where you see him listed, he's either a 3 or a 4, but he's a guy that checks off a lot of the boxes we had talked about throughout this process. Not necessarily old, but not young either. And it appears that the Bucks just said, look, our best path here is, this is a guy that, as we talk about, we need more size. We think he can do that. We think he can bring that relatively soon. And the other pick, that's something that's more of a, we'll see where we're at in a year or two with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think for some people, if the Bucks would have drafted these guys in reverse order, where it's Tyler Smith at 23 and then AJ Johnson at 33, I do wonder how the reaction would have been. But Tyler Smith, like you mentioned, he's 19 going on 20. He played for the G League Ignite last year. What he is a shooter. Like, a lot of the offensive comps that I've seen around him, and people just looking at his game, I've heard some Bobby Portis in this game. That's something that my co-host from Technical Following Me, Eric, we talked about, and he said he reminds me a bit of like a young Bobby Portis with the offensive game. He's an aggressive offensive player at this point. He loves that three-point shot, and he's pretty good at it at his size and at his age as well. And just in my personal type, even noted that he was really good as a transition 3-point shooter as well. He shot 47% from 3 in transition as well. On transition, he doesn't mind being that trail guy to pull up and shoot. But the other side of the ball for Tyler Smith, which is that defensive side, there are some questions there, but you can see the potential of what he could become if he's able to continue developing in that way. He had to put some more weight on. You saw him getting overpowered early on in that G League Ignite season. He got a bit stronger as it went on, but you would still like to see him add some more strength to that frame. And he projects, if he was able to hit that ceiling, as a more modern big where you can do some switching, stand on perimeter a little bit there, and play some versatile defensive schemes. If he can grow into that. Right now, it's a flash of like, we think he can be this. And that's been the biggest surprise for me so far with the Bucks draft, is that, given the fact that they're in this championship window, we've discussed it many times, like they need guys who are ready to play now. They need more athleticism now. Both picks, Tyler Smith and AJ Johnson, both project to me as guys who need some time to get things together. I don't see either one of those players being a big contributor in their rookie year, which made me think like the Bucks must feel pretty good about some combination of AJ Green, Marjon Beauchamp, Andre Jackson Jr., and Chris Livingston, because what these draft picks have said to me is like, we can take some time here. These guys can be end of the bench. They can figure it out. They can develop. They can get some hurry games in. They can learn from the vets up here. We're not going to be asking too much of them right now, is how it seems to me. But these other 4 guys who I just mentioned, the other AJ, Ajax, like someone from that group, I feel like the Bucks are confident that they're going to be able to be a role player, because neither of these picks project as guys who can really help you now, which is what I think a lot of Bucks fans and even media pundits thought the Bucks would do, given where they currently are as a championship contending team.
Yeah, and we kind of have the same conversations too. So I don't want to, talk out of both sides of our mouth here, but when we started this process of the offseason for the Bucks, we had mentioned, look, here's the challenging part, the tricky part for the Bucks is your expectations are win now and compete for a championship. As we spoke at length, what you saw from Chris in that series against the Pacers, what you saw from Dame when he was healthy, you view that and you say, okay, this works. So we're only going to be better with Giannis on the floor. But how realistic is it to say half of your bench, if not more, is going to be young guys that are in year 1, 2, or 3? We just didn't really see that as being the case. So these picks are much more, I think Tyler Smith has the better chance to play significant, isn't even the right way to put it. Just play more this season. Yeah. But they're both, as you mentioned, more of probably a year from now, best case scenario. Let's see what they develop into. And I think it's funny that I think, as you mentioned, if these picks are made in reverse, the overall view of this draft for the Bucks is a little different in all likelihood. But I think maybe it's just because of the position that he plays, and hearing Doc Rivers, well, not Doc Rivers himself, but hearing others say Doc Rivers has indicated we want to be more versatile defensively, and thinking about those things, that we kind of put all of that on Tyler Smith and say, well, this guy fits it and they can do some things. But to play devil's advocate here, Sam Vecini, who we've mentioned his work quite a bit here these last couple of weeks as we highlighted some draft prospects. He's maybe the best there is out there in terms of draft intel guys for a national publication. Didn't really have glowing things to say about Tyler Smith in his most recent write-up, saying Smith is a serious project who I can understand a team falling in love with developmentally. His jumper is a significant weapon for his size. He will knock down shots throughout his career. That's meaningful at the 4 or potentially at the 5 if he can get stronger. However, his measurements and game make him a little too much of a tweener between the 4 and 5 spots right now. He is not strong or physical enough to play the 5, but also doesn't possess enough all-around skill to the game in terms of making a play on the perimeter beyond shooting. That's where he should fit best in the modern league, is essentially a stretch 4. He needs to be more capable of putting the ball on the ground, making positive reads, and processing the game in what he's seen out there. On top of that, he'll need to make significant defensive strides because this year was a struggle on that end. He was a teenager playing professional basketball for the first time, but it also makes him a significant project. Certain teams will be more willing to take the plunge and see if they can get the most out of Smith's physical tools. Others won't want to take the time to develop him on defense. He seems like a player who will likely play in the NBA for a while, but might end up working out better for the second team that gets him opposed to the first. And I think the comp that you mentioned of Bobby Portis, when you listen to that, I don't mean this as a knock on BP, but a lot of that is, yeah, that's kind of Bobby Portis, even down to the maybe not so much the second team. This is what, the fourth team that got him. But even that of, you get him with the right group where he's had some time to learn the game a bit, develop some, and learn from everything along the way. That's probably where he's going to thrive. Seems to be, and it's not just Sam Vecini. I know we've read that scouting report from him, but I saw a lot of that as it related to Tyler Smith here.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in the Ringers write-up, like they mentioned the fact like the shooting is there. He has the body to become a defender, but the defense is, he looked a little lost out there a lot of times. But one piece that you mentioned for me is in the write-up that Vecini did, mentioning that one team will fall in love with him and want to take a chance on development. And that's like, of course, that's how it goes every year. It's just the surprise for me was that it was the Bucks. That was the team like, yeah, we're willing to take a chance on the development piece of it. And I think about the conversations that we've had about, do the Bucks roll with 6 young guys on their roster? Feels like a lot. I think about conversations that have been happening over the last few weeks with just learning about more teams and how they're trying to navigate the new reality that comes with the CBA of being a first or a second apron team. And I wondered if with that comes a bigger investment in player development, understanding like, listen, just the way that our team is handicapped right now, we're going to try to get some young guys under contract for multiple years who are going to be cheap on the bench for us to have, and maybe they can develop into something special. But right now with trying to build this team, like we need these cheap contracts. And part of me was thinking because of that, hey, maybe the Bucks trade down or trade out just to get future assets, or maybe they use those assets to get another vet, something like that. But to see that they took both picks and kept both picks was really interesting to me of like, okay, I do wonder how much of this is just understanding like going forward, player development is going to have to be something that we do. And we're going to have to draft well, because if you look back through the John Horst drafts, like not that many hits so far. I mean, Dante DiVincenzo is probably the best of that bunch so far, but few and far between outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, Dante certainly up there. Malcolm Brogdon was a John Horst selection too, was he not? But again, Malcolm, other end of the spectrum, where you knew an older player, somebody that played multiple years in college, had the pedigree collegiately, that you kind of knew high floor that you're bringing in here with Malcolm Brogdon. A couple of other things I did want to mention about Tyler Smith, and that last point that you made too about development and what the Bucks have done here with these selections in the first and second round. 2 teenagers that they took and 2 projects that they are working on here with these 2 draft picks. So we'll get into that conversation coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends over at Game Time. I have talked to you before about how much I love going to Major League Baseball games during the off season. Went to Detroit last summer, took in a Tigers game from Comerica for the first time. You can find me at American Family Field quite a bit this summer, even in Chicago on the South Side. Game Time is the absolute perfect app to use for any Major League Baseball game you plan on attending this summer. They have last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off when you buy last minute for sports, for concerts, comedy, theater, and more. All-in pricing as well, so you can see what the ticket is going to cost you with all those fees up front. No sticker shock when you get to checkout. You can see a panoramic view from your seat within the app before you buy your ticket as well. And most importantly, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a lower price out there on those seats. That is the Game Time lowest price guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting? If so, it is time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for you every single day, bringing you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, and it streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Tyler Smith, I mentioned, I forget how I worded it, but the insinuation of he's a little older. What I mean by that is he played for the G League Ignite team a year ago. He was on the overtime elite squad for 2 years prior to that as well. So not professional play per se, but basically getting you ready for professional play. So in that sense, he has a little bit more seasoning. But, you know, as we mentioned, these are two projects. These are two guys that you don't look at and say, these are going to be big time contributors for you in year one. And, you know, you can view it either way. I'm not convinced that's a bad thing for the Bucks for all the reasons, Camille, that you mentioned and what we've talked about throughout the entire offseason here, of the need to get younger and more athletic. You want that now, but you're going to need it in general. And I think that's the big piece here. I've seen some people throw out hey, you know, Doc Rivers' first year in Philly when he was the head coach, he made some similar claims of we need to be a quicker team and more athletic. That's when they drafted Tyrese Maxey. I don't anticipate Tyler Smith in the second round here, or really, especially AJ Johnson, to fill that role of Tyrese Maxey this season. But, you know, it is, if nothing else, going to make Summer League very, very intriguing for the Bucks this year. And it's kind of a conversation we had last year as well. But you think about who knows if AJ Green and Marjon Beauchamp play there, even Andre Jackson Jr., but Chris Livingston, I would assume, is going to be playing in Summer League once more. These two guys, I would assume, are going to be playing in Summer League, maybe even Ty Washington again. And it's different than Major League Baseball when you have 3 levels of minor leagues and other places for these players to grow and learn and get consistent reps. But they may not be blue chip lottery level players. But again, we haven't seen this in decades for the Bucks, where you have a handful of young guys that you're looking at to say, okay, I'm interested to see how they develop here.
And that's what everybody's been wanting. Like you mentioned, like get younger, get more athletic. And then of course there's the whole conversation like, well, I mean, it doesn't matter because Doc Rivers doesn't play young guys anyway, which isn't true. It's going to seem like when Doc has good young guys to play, Doc plays the good young guy. So like, I don't think that Bucks fans should look at this and say, well, this doesn't matter. It matters because there are 6 guys already on your roster who are considered young guys at this moment. We don't know if this is how the roster is going to look when they head into training camp. So we can only speak on how the roster is now. But I do not think that it's a slight on like, oh, well, it's not like he's going to play them anyways. If they're good, they will get playing time. And I truly do believe that with Doc Rivers. And before we started recording, we were talking a little bit just about like draft philosophy for teams and whatnot. And I mentioned this before somewhere else as well, where I was just like, it's so interesting because I think of like the Packers, right? They have a Packer way. They've had a GM, then the next GM's like a GM in training, and it kind of just keeps passing it down. And they all believe in the Packer way. There are certain things they look for in every position. You know it. Like you can go and look it up. There's certain types of guys they want for their team. But when it comes to like the Bucks and thinking like, well, is this a Milwaukee Buck? Is this the kind of guy who projects to be somebody who plays for this team? The answer to that question is going to change depending on the coach, it feels like, because we saw with Doc or with Bud, the kind of guys that Bud liked. He loved the defense. He loved the shooting. That was part of what he looked for in his profile. We saw with the 1 year with Adrian Griffin, which made us all like, ooh, how is this going to work? Where he drafted 2 quote unquote non-shooters with Andre Jackson Jr. and Chris Livingston, when you're like, okay, well, these guys can play defense. So like, what is Adrian Griffin looking to do? Alas, that experiment only lasted half the season for the Bucks with Adrian Griffin, but now Doc's in that seat. So it's like, what is Doc's influence as well over what type of guys that he's looking for on his roster? And it's really interesting to see the direction that they chose in this particular draft with AJ Johnson, with Tyler Smith. Now, again, we discussed it's not super likely that either of these guys get really meaningful minutes this year, but the profile, the type of player that they are, is also really interesting to me as well.
Yeah, and look, I also think the fact that we didn't hear anything, because you've seen a little bit of it, not a ton, but of Bucks fans wondering, I mean, are we necessarily keeping both these guys as a part of a trade that you could add some type of sweetener to once you get under that second apron? That's the big piece to remember is before you could have attached that pick to let's just throw out names, Pat Connaughton or Bobby Portis, and made the trade. Now that player is an actual asset and player, you cannot aggregate that and send it out. And also it's the whole, driving the car off the lot mentality of a first round draft pick carries more value, even if it ends up being the 23rd pick, because it represents the unknown and possibilities of what it might be. And once you make that selection, it becomes a player. It's just like when you buy a new car and drive it off the lot and, well, it just depreciated by 10%. It's kind of the same thing with these draft picks. So I don't think either of these two players were drafted to be traded or are going to be traded. And that's what makes this weekend all the more interesting, Camille, is, again, to go back to that other piece of the conversation, is Andre Jackson Jr., AJ Green, Marjan, are these guys going to be three of their bench pieces? A lot of that is going to have to do with what the Bucks are able to do this weekend when free agency officially begins Sunday afternoon, 5:00 Milwaukee time. Or are there other trades or moves that are in the works? And look, let's say you move on from some of those young guys. To me, that would signal, we all assume these two guys are projects, but maybe the organization views it as, no, we think we can get something, not necessarily our sixth man, but we think we can get something from these guys this year.
It's possible. I mean, there are people who are disappointed at the fact that, the Bucks didn't make any other trades, where they're like, oh, it seems like now they're just going to bring back everybody who they had and not do anything. I was like, free agency hasn't even started yet, guys.
Yeah,
like,
and I mean, I think we're both aligned here. I don't think that's the case, right? Because if they do that, they are definitely going to be a second apron team. And the big piece is you just don't want to be a habitual offender in the second apron. There's going to be years where it's unavoidable, right? And that was last year for the Bucks. But you don't want this to be, okay, we're there again. And man, now we really got to do everything we can to get out of it, because picks are frozen and everything else that comes with it once you're in there multiple times.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that to yourself. So it's like, just because nothing has happened yet does not mean that anything is not going to happen, period. So I do want to say that as well, because I did see some reactions of, I can't believe this is the direction that the Bucks are going in. Like, we don't know if this is the full offseason for the Bucks yet at this point. What we know now is that they have their 2 draft picks. They kept both of them for the moment. It seems like they're going to be Bucks. It seems like we're going to see them in Summer League, but we'll have to see what other roster moves are made around them. But them going with these 2 younger projects, it does make me think about free agency and saying, like, how aggressive will the Bucks be if they're looking for turnover for guys who are going to be getting big minutes? Like, do we still see? I mean, we've heard Brook Lopez's name in the trade conversations. Is that somebody who's still a target for the Bucks, try to get off the books? Or now with the draft falling the way it did, where you see Khalil Ware go at 15 to the Heat, and then you see Deron Holmes taking a pick before you in the first round when the Heat or when the Nuggets trade up. Now is it like, okay, we weren't able to get a young center like we thought we would. Maybe we actually run this back, or we look to trade Brook Lopez for another center if we can. Like, the dynamics are going to be really interesting to me this summer based off what the Bucks did in this draft.
Yeah, and if my math is correct here, so the Bucks now have 12 players. Assuming you sign both these draft picks, they would have 12 players under contract, and they would be basically right at that second apron line, still needing to add 2 more. So again, I feel pretty confident that some type of move is going to be made here. Something is going to happen in terms of a trade to free up some money. Whether or not that means that, hey, the Bucks shed enough that they're going to use the taxpayer mid-level or do something, I don't know that I'd get all too excited about that, but I do think you're going to see something done here for the Bucks to free up some of that cap room. And we did see one of those types of trades that we were saying we want to see the Bucks make here between the Denver Nuggets and the Charlotte Hornets. So we will get into that conversation and some other things that struck us from the draft. There were a couple of Marquette products that went right around where the Bucks were drafting. And one team that Camille and I were talking about, some of the moves that were eyebrow raising in a good way of, oh, I see what they're doing here. We'll get into that conversation coming up here after the break on Locked On Bucks. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, Camille, I do want to touch on the trade that I referenced that we saw between the Nuggets and the Charlotte Hornets, but we'd be remiss if we didn't mention we saw both Oso and Tyler Kolek go in the second round. Tyler Kolek went one pick after the Bucks took Tyler Smith as well. Both drafted by the Portland Trail Blazers. Kolek, though, is headed to the Knicks, and Oso is headed to the Phoenix Suns, which brings us, well, let's save that. Any takeaways, thoughts on those two for your beloved Marquette Golden Eagles going in the second round?
Happy to see more Golden Eagles in the NBA for sure. I love the idea of Tyler Kolek in New York. It did make me wonder, like, just the fit because of Deuce McBride being there as well. But then I was hearing rumors like he might be included for salary filler for the Mikal Bridges trade. So I'm like, that would make a lot of sense as insurance as well for another backup point guard on that roster. I think that's a great fit for him. And then you got Oso in Phoenix with Bud, which coaching-wise, it just feels like a great fit for him. My only quote-unquote concern would just be, like, again, the pressure situation you're walking in with those vets that are on that team currently with the Devin Booker, with the Kevin Durant, and a Bradley Beal. But given the type of big that Oso is, with being that pass-first mentality, being a hub, someone you can operate the offense out of as well, I think Bud's going to find some really creative ways to use him. So I'm happy both guys made it to a situation in the league where I think they can get some playing time if things shake out the right way and make a little impact in their rookie year.
That kind of takes me to the other part of it, the Phoenix Suns. Bud as the coach, and you look at what they did in the draft here, Oso and Ryan Dunn, two guys that I think are going to step in and be immediate bench players and contributors for that Phoenix Suns team. We talked about Oso in our episode on the Bigs about being a hub of sorts. His defensive ability as well, and what he brings with versatility there. I think it's going to be interesting to see if the Suns make any other moves. Yusef Nurkic is one that you would look at as well, of how do we shed some more money, similar to what the Bucks are talking about. Oso's very interesting because I've also seen a few of the draft intel types saying, you know, Ryan Dunn, he might just be a small ball five that you play at the NBA level because he's going to be best utilized in the dunker spot. And obviously the shooting concerns and overall offensive concerns that we mentioned are there, but he can defend 1 through 5. I mean, it may depend on the 5. I don't think anybody's anticipating Ryan Dunn to lock down Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic, but those tools are there. So did they find two centers here? That makes it even easier to, here's how we free up money. If we can get somebody to take that Yusef Nurkic contract, which, by the way, you know what, a year ago, year and a half, somewhere around there, that was how do you move that Yusef Nurkic deal? It's pretty bad when you look at the years that were on there. It's just over $19 million a year when you think about the figures that we're seeing now skyrocketing. It's not, look, we've kind of joked about it before, but it's true. There is no such thing as an immovable contract in the league anymore, unless it's Bradley Beal with a no trade clause. So that I found pretty interesting of, okay, what else is Phoenix working on? Because they're in the same spot the Bucks are of, I don't think they're done here. And I don't think the plan is we're just going to sign guys to vet minimums because that's all we can do. I think there's going to be more moves in the works, especially for Bud. You don't just go to Phoenix only because, hey, I'm an Arizona guy and I get to be back home. Like, you have an expectation of winning too, and they're going to have to make some moves for that to be the case. Speaking of moves, so early into the second round, we saw the Denver Nuggets, who, again, when we talk about teams that are trying to free up some money to avoid that second apron and other issues that come with that, saw the Denver Nuggets with a salary right now that I think is about $170 million. They only have 10 players under contract, similar to the Bucks, and that apron level, you're $20 million below it. Well, how they're able to shave some more off of that, they trade Reggie Jackson to the Charlotte Hornets in a deal that was a cost-saving move for the Nuggets. The Hornets took it on because the price was, all right, 3 second-round draft picks. So let's just start there, Camille. The price to move a 1-year expiring contract, which is Reggie Jackson more valuable, more playable at this point for a majority of the teams than Pat Connaughton? I think most people would probably say yes, that he's a better fit across the board. But the point is, $5 million, 1 year left in that deal, cost 3 second-round picks to move that pick. So for Pat, if that's who you're circled in on in terms of making moves and freeing up money, contract is basically twice as much as that Reggie Jackson salary figure. He's at about $9.5 million for next year. And then there's a player option for the year after that for that same figure. So I would assume if you find a team that says, okay, because that's the other thing, teams need to spend the money now, right? You can't just do the old method of, look, you have a salary floor. If you don't match it, you got to play your players at the end of the year, the bonus level. No, you have to get up to I think it's 80% of the salary floor by the start of the season. So you got to take on salary if you're one of those cap space teams and don't have someone, but it costs 3 second-round picks for a team to take $5 million. So what's it going to cost for a team to take on roughly twice as much as that for a player that, look, Reggie Jackson regressed and declined as well. He still had some playoff moments, but I think there's probably more questions about Pat than there is Reggie Jackson.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the team where Reggie Jackson went as well, where it's like you went to the Hornets. Again, you mentioned that these are teams that have the cap space, but also you look at where the Hornets are in their current development cycle. They've had the bad injury health with LaMelo Ball there as well. And they're young and they're rebuilding and they're trying to figure things out. So in addition to having the space, it's kind of like, okay, well, it's not as if they were looking like attending teams like, hey, we need this guy on our team right now. Like this was like you mentioned, a salary dump. And when you think about the Pat Connaughton situation, that's where it's like, so some of like this is why you should have probably made a deal when you could still aggregate contracts, because you don't have the draft capital necessarily to make this look sweeter. But if you could have made this trade when you could still aggregate contracts, then it's like, okay, well, at least we also get just theoretically, a margin to go with that. Like then that is your sweetener rather than the assets, which the Bucks don't have many of to give. So it will be interesting to see how they do it, or it might become a thing where the season gets closer and there's a team out there that is still scrambling to put together the salary to hit that floor. So they're looking for offers at that point. So the asking price might be a little lower at that time, just based on what the market is dictating. But yeah, to your point about what Reggie Jackson got and looking to offload someone like Pat Connaughton, it's going to be difficult. And I think at this point too, thinking about Pat Connaughton's career, like people don't think of Pat Connaughton as a Buck. Like he spent most of his career here at this point, which in retrospect, you might not think about it because he's been a role player for so many years, but he was in Portland for 3 years before he came to Milwaukee. And he's been here since like 2018. So he's a Buck. And I think that there will be some cachet of him being a champion that might be able to help with that asking price of what it would take to offload that contract. But yeah, Horace will have his work cut out for him if he is looking to salary dump that contract.
When we talked about Tyler Smith and the Sam Vecini line too, about maybe it's the second team that gets him that will really reap those benefits. That was the Bucks with Pat Connaughton. He was team number 2, his 4th year in the league after 2 or 3 years in Portland. You saw some traces there, but he really exploded with the Bucks. The Hornets are going to be fascinating to me this offseason because their roster is set. They have 15 rostered players right now and a team salary of just under $124 million. The cap number is $141 million. So they're open for business. You would think of, okay, we still got room where give us something and we'll send out less and take back more in a deal. It's going to hard cap them if they do that. But again, they have the room to do that. It hard caps you, I believe, at the first apron line, which is $179 million. So they still have $50 million to play with before they get there. You look at guys like Grant Williams, Cody Martin, those types of names, even Reggie Jackson, I think potentially, if nothing else, a deadline type of move for the Hornets. Davis Bertans as well. If there's a team that just says, we got a guy that's under contract for 3 years, we just need to shed money, we'll take the expiring contract in Davis Bertans. So I think there's going to be a handful more moves made by the Charlotte Hornets. But in wrapping this up, that's the complicated part is I think we all know the high level machinations of the cap and both the apron numbers, but there's a lot more to it. What we just mentioned there is you take back more money than you're sending out, you get hard capped, and what that starts to trigger for you as well. So it's not as easy as, well, this works out for this. I just ran it through the trade machine. That's what makes this weekend all the more crazy, really. And I was on a show earlier today where we were talking through some of those names and was asked, well, what can the Bucks do? Are they going to be under the second apron? Who are some names they can target? What about this team? And, you look at teams like the Hornets and those names that we mentioned. I think everybody would say, look, Grant Williams, if you can get him, go get him. To the point that you made, Camille, about did you miss your opportunity? Bobby Portis, when you think about his contract, $12.5 million. Grant Williams makes more than that. So you could not revisit that trade right now of we'll give you Bobby and something else or even straight up for Grant Williams because you're restricted from doing that, being in the second apron and Bobby making less than Grant Williams. Other names on there too of, well, what if you sent out this? And brought back Davis Bertans? There's expiring money for you to shut off your cap and you could release him. The only guy that you could send out under that trade is Brook Lopez. And then you're getting nothing in return for him. I was asked specifically about the Brooklyn Nets and some of the names that are on there because that's the other team that we assume is open for business now. Right. They are, hey, we're planting our flag for Cooper next year. We're going to be as bad as we can. Bojan Bogdanovic, he's going to be interesting. I assume he gets traded. Dorian Finney-Smith, right? That's a name that Bucks fans love and are going to mention. There's not a great fit on the roster in terms of matching trades for anyone that the Bucks could send out. The only guy you could trade for Dorian Finney-Smith is Brook Lopez. So that's the challenge that the Bucks are going to be facing here, and why we kind of said, I don't know that you're going to see wholesale reshaping of this team, that the moves made are likely going to be like we just saw with Reggie Jackson, to shave some of that money and make sure it's not back-to-back years in the second apron.
Well, maybe one famous old Bucks trade partner in the same division, maybe the Detroit Pistons will be open for some of that business since they have a lot of cap room this summer. It'll be really interesting to see.
And a lot is an understatement. They have like $90 million.
Called them up like, hey, we've done business before. Like, what would it take for us to be able to dump some salary cap here as well? So, I mean, that's just a team to keep on your radar. But as we wrap up, I'm going to take this moment here just to plug us. We will be on Bleacher Report app at 11 a.m. Central Time today, Friday, June 28th, talking more about the Bucks free agency and options that they have. So this is kind of like I don't say a teaser into that conversation, but it definitely flows into what we'll be talking about a little bit later on today.
Yeah, we will be on Bleacher Report on the app discussing more free agency, if there's going to be any more moves that take place between now and then, and reacting to that and what that could potentially mean for the Bucks. And then, of course, everything really gets kicked up this weekend. 5 p.m. local time is when free agency officially begins. Sunday, 5 p.m. local time is when teams are free to negotiate with other players. Funny how that works out, that the restriction is lifted at 5 and you've already worked out these multi-million-dollar contracts at 5:01. I've never figured out how that's the case. But we're going to have something going Sunday afternoon as soon as free agency begins to see what happens here with the Bucks. Camille and Frank handled the first round of the draft last night. I'll just say this in transparency, Camille, my thanks to both of you guys for handling that. I was communicating with Camille throughout the day. I had every intention of being a part of that show. For the 2 or 3 of you that are disappointed that I was not on the show, an old friend of mine was in town who stays in Virginia in the off season and during the basketball season lives in Milwaukee, and was adamant on getting dinner. So we went out, and before you knew it, you looked at the clock and said, oh man, all right, well, I guess you two have this one.
Yeah, so we were like, you know what? It's been a little while. Let's just go ahead. Like, we got it for you for sure. That's what a team does. You pick up for each other. So it was all good.
Sunday is when it all gets going. Free agency finally here. So we're going to do something. I don't know if we'll do a live show. If something warrants it, we'll go live Sunday afternoon. Otherwise, Monday's show is going to be focused on what are the moves that we saw made immediately into free agency. Is this going to be one of those weird years where it drags too? You had a couple of smaller scale signings and moves made, but nothing major happened until like the 4th of July when Kevin Durant announced he was signing with the Golden State Warriors. Gordon Hayward, I think, was a 4th of July signing as well. A couple of years back when he went to the Celtics. So is it going to be one of those years, or is this going to be just everything out of the gate, kind of like it was a season ago? So we will have that covered on Monday's show. And as Camille mentioned as well, later today, Friday afternoon, late morning, I suppose, 11 a.m., we will be on the Bleacher Report app breaking down more of everything we discussed here in a little greater detail as we head into free agency with the draft now fully in the rearview mirror. So tune into that as well. We'll send out the links on how to join that conversation. For Camille, I am Justin. We'll talk to you once again next week on Locked On Bucks.